Homophones. They're fun, aren't they? How two words can sound the same but mean two completely different things, like pee and pee, or foul and foul, or to be or not to be. There are loads of them in the English language, and another one that comes to mind is plain and plane, which brings us to the new disaster movie from Gerard Butler, Plane. No, not that plane. Well, actually, yes, it is that plane, but it's also about a plane. The flying type, not the boring one. Okay, well, maybe a little bit boring. But before I get started, please consider subscribing, and if you like this content, give it a like. Okay, on with the vid. This movie stars Gerard Butler, playing Gerard Butler, playing a Scottish airline pilot who used to fly cargo planes for the RAF, but now flies passenger jets for a little-known airline in Asia. He finds himself flying a plane with only around 20 passengers, and so when it turns out that there is a storm in his flight path, his boss tells him that it isn't worth the extra $16,000 worth of fuel it would cost to fly around, so he should fly over it. But when he gets there, he finds that the storm is too big to fly over, too low to get under, he's stuck in the middle, and the pain is, no doubt, thunder. And if it wasn't right then, it certainly would be soon. I'm not sure what Gerard's character was called, but since he was playing himself, I would just refer to him by name. At the last minute, just as Gerard is about to take off, an air marshal, or whatever the plane police are called, arrives, and he has a prisoner who is being transported to another prison. This prisoner is played by the guy that played Luke Cage, so I'll refer to him as Luke Cage since I don't actually know his proper name. He is a convicted murderer and is considered a bit dangerous-ish. I guess if he was very dangerous, or even mildly dangerous, they would have sent more than just one guy to escort him. But it seems there is so little to worry about that even the air marshal is more concerned about dropping his phone than watching Luke Cage. The flight seems to be going well, with passengers partaking in copious amounts of alcohol and glancing suspiciously at the criminal sat at the back of the plane when they reach the storm, which is a lot worse than expected. Gerard climbs to 40,000 feet, but manages to hit some severe electrical interference and loses avionics. Which sounds bad, but it gets worse, as it turns out they've lost all power, and are now running on batteries, which gives them 10 minutes before they have to go into a death spiral and hit the sea like a very fragile dart into a very soggy, though rock-like hard at 400 miles per hour, Pacific Ocean type board. Unfortunately, the air marshal's obsession with his phone leads to his demise, as he accidentally drops it and after taking off his seatbelt to reach it, gets bounced around the cabin like a pinball as the turbulence becomes very severe. An air stewardess also pays the ultimate price for being too dutiful when she tries to get the air marshal to go and sit back down. And suddenly, the flight has become a very serious event, even for the passengers, who up to this point were just scared of the storm, but now they're looking at two bodies lying in the aisle. At this point, Gerard warns the passengers that it would save the crash investigation team a lot of time if they would just take the body bags out from under their seats and climb into them. But at that exact moment, Gerard spots land, and so leaves the cold, cruel sea behind them, and instead finds himself flying over some nice, soft jungle, which is world-renowned for giving crash-landing aircraft pillowy soft, not at all spiky and grater-like landings that leave nothing but little bits and bobs dotted around the place. Then, after miraculously finding land in the middle of the Pacific, Gerard spots something that brings him huge amounts of hope. Have you guessed what it is yet? Yes, he sees a road. Now, I know what you're thinking. A road in a jungle? Well, that's going to be about as much use to a crashing airplane as the upslope of a mountainside. Well, you would be wrong, because unlike most jungle roads that are overgrown, windy, and just about wide enough that you can fit through if you turn sideways and shuffle, this road defies all jungle logic by being very straight and very wide. In fact, it is so straight and so wide that you can land an aircraft with a wingspan of around 100 feet with room to spare. Gerard manages to get the plane down safely on the jungle runway, and after evacuating the passengers, he informs them that they were struck by lightning, and the main power and radio are down, so they have no way of taking off again, and they can't contact anyone to let them know the shit has hit the turbine. You see what I did there? Why the hell am I impersonating Rolf Harris? What is wrong with me? Two little boys had two little toys. I don't know why I know this song. Okay, well, now that we have the disaster part of the disaster movie underway, let's have a look at what happens next. First off, Gerard needs to contact the authorities and let them know what happened, so he will need to set off into the jungle and look for civilization. But there's the prisoner situation. Gerard takes a second to think, convicted murderer, probably shouldn't be left alone with a bunch of civilian passengers, and so does the only thing that he can. What's that, I hear you ask? Did he cuff him to a tree? Did he cuff him to one of the heavy bits of machinery that must have been used to make this perfect, wide, flat, straight road that appears suspiciously like a runway waiting to save a crashing airplane from destruction? Did he maybe cuff him to the plane itself, since that was certainly going nowhere? Nope. What he did was release the murderer, and volunteer him to come with him to look for help, which was an odd choice since he knew nothing about him except that he had been convicted of murder 15 years ago, and had been on the run ever since. For all he knew, in the meantime, he'd been wending his merry way around the world, murdering airline passengers. But apparently Luke Cage just looks so harmless that absolutely nobody is especially worried about him being a danger. So Gerard, after uncuffing Luke, yes, he even uncuffed him to make it easier for him to murder people when he inevitably disappears, sets off into the jungle to look for help. After Luke Cage gives him his sob story about how he was only 18 when he murdered someone because being young means you aren't responsible for your actions, and we should all forgive you because you just didn't know any better. Poor Diddums. After running away from the murder, he did what all good criminals who want to erase their past do. He joined the French Foreign Legion, world-renowned hiding place of dodgy blokes that need a new identity, and who want to attempt to re-enter society as a French citizen after 3 to 5 years of being put through hell for the glory of France. Of course, his story about joining the Foreign Legion is a bit shady, because the Legion generally doesn't accept serious criminals anymore, and their background checks are quite thorough, so convicted murderers are unlikely to get through. But hey, it sounds cool, so that's all that matters to Hollywood. So no sooner has Luke Cage finished with his "it's not my fault, bro" story, he disappears. Imagine my shock. Gerard then looks vaguely surprised before realizing that the criminal's role is kind of irrelevant to the story, and so gets on with his jungle hike. Then, out of the foliage looms what appears to be an abandoned office block, and if you're thinking, what the hell is a 70s era looking office block doing in the middle of a jungle, then you're not alone, because this thought was way more interesting than the movie. Was there once a bustling town filled with men in suits travelling back and forth? Was it a leftover from World War II? Was some Japanese soldier who's been hiding out in the jungle for over 70 years going to jump out and die of a heart attack? Because the dude would be well over 100 years old by now. I don't know, but it was worth taking some time to consider while Gerard had a wander about. But then, Gerard finds a phone. It doesn't look like it will work, what with all the wires hanging out all over the place, but lo and behold, it's still functional. And even more amazing, someone is actually still paying the phone bill. Gerard then manages to get in touch with his airline, but the woman at the reception doesn't believe him and blithers on about crank calls. In desperation, Gerard calls his daughter, and that is about as far as that storyline goes because the bosses at his airline get the recording of his call and send out some mercenaries to save his ass. Then all of a sudden, a bunch of bad guys with guns show up, and things don't look great for our errant airline pilot, but help comes in the form of our friendly neighbourhood murderer, who does what it says on the tin, and kills the baddies. Our two heroes, well, one hero, one murderer, who still seems to be in good practice considering he supposedly did it only once 15 years ago. Yeah, right, and I'm the Queen of Sheba. Oh, wait, I forgot you can identify as anything you want now, so this doesn't really work anymore. Well, then, yeah, and my car doesn't have an oil leak. This works because my car does have an oil leak, though it seems less fun when you have to actually explain your silly quips. The world really has become very grey. At this rate, everything will be as bland as the interior of Red Dwarf from season 1 and 2. Except, of course, gender diversity, since there seems to be no limit as to how far they will push this. Bullshit! Where was I? Okay, from this point it gets a bit formulaic. Okay, a bit more formulaic. With some jungle terrorist revealing himself as the big bad and kidnapping the plane's passengers for ransom. Luke Cage then helps Gerard try to rescue them. The rescue was going okay, but at the last minute they found that they had no way out, and so Gerard had the amazing idea of sacrificing himself to give the others time to escape. His amazing selfless idea is then ruined by the airline's mercenaries turning up, and after they turn most of the bad guys into makeshift colanders, they all escape back to the plane. Unluckily for them, they didn't manage to get the main bad guy, and so he gathers up more bad guys, and they go after the passengers and mercenaries. But all is not lost because Gerard has a plan. It happens that earlier on, he and his co-pilot managed to get the power back on in the plane, which means that they can get airborne, but they dumped most of their fuel because they thought they were going to crash land. And airplanes make remarkably good ovens when you apply a bit of fuel, so it was the right call at the time. As luck would have it, one of the fuel tanks refused to expel the fuel, so they have just enough fuel to get them the hell out of Dodge. Back at the plane, pre-flight checks seem a bit of an indulgence considering the 50 or more men with machine guns and a rocket launcher that are about to burst out of the jungle and make Swiss cheese look like a very conservatively wholly savoury food. But Gerard is nothing if not professional, and so will not be rushed by the prospect of ending up like a sponge with the water being squeezed out. After finally assuring himself that the plane was probably not going to kill them, and to the mercenaries' relief since they had been out there keeping the nasty bad guys who were certainly trying to kill them at bay, everybody boards the plane and they all head off into the peaceful blue skies of the South Pacific. Finally they're free to go home. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. In the meantime, the murderer Luke Cage is getting his jollies by supposedly helping Gerard and the passengers escape. But for all we know, he is probably just trying to fill his daily murder quota, since we know nothing about him except that he is an escaped murderer who has been on the run for 15 years. Well, Luke finds a big bag full of cash, and so since he doesn't really fancy going to prison, and plus he found a big pile of cash, he slinks off into the jungle to restart his career as a probable serial killer or contract killer, or whatever it is that murderers do while they avoid the law. Remember when we all sighed with relief at Gerard and his passengers escaping from the nasty bad guys? Well, that was just a little too soon, as no sooner are they up in the air than one of the engines fails, a wing is damaged and they have very little fuel and can't gain altitude. So they need to land again as soon as possible, and it just so happens that there is an airport just 50 miles away, which luckily is a very straightforward trip and takes around 30 seconds of movie time, and they are directly aligned with the runway already. I agree, that was a very lucky coincidence, and made the last few minutes of this movie that could have been all tense with worry and pressure and emotional depth a breeze. Gerard lands a plane, and all is actually well that ends well. And so, I am left wondering, what was the point of this film? It isn't much of an action-adventure movie, and it isn't much of a disaster movie. Yes, there is action, and yes, there is a disaster, but it doesn't feel consequential. It doesn't put you on the edge of your seat. It doesn't have you feeling inner emotional turmoil. It doesn't do anything. It is a very plain movie about, a plane. That said, it isn't bad, it isn't woke, it isn't torture to sit through. If you're busily doing things and this movie is playing somewhere in the background, it is the sort of movie that you can check in on every 20 minutes or so and not feel as though you've missed anything. You'll probably miss the ending, but you won't care because it wasn't interesting enough to become invested in. It is just a quiet little movie that doesn't make waves and gives a few actors a job for a couple of weeks. The performances were actually pretty good, everyone was reasonably believable, though I think Luke Cage was somewhat miscast and didn't really make much of an impact. In fact, my favourite characters are the mercenaries who really looked the part and were very calm and collected and professional, as though they really had been in this line of work for a long time and were used to the shit hitting the fan on a regular basis. In fact, I'd be interested in some sort of sequel involving them, but instead, it's been announced that Luke Cage will return in a movie imaginatively named Ship. So if you need some background noise, then this is the movie for you. If, on the other hand, you want to sit and be engrossed in an interesting, absorbing disaster movie, then watch something else because you'll be very disappointed. This has been Movie Suck, thinking that I might just have to watch 300 again, just so that I can see Gerard Butler being interesting.
This is Sparta!
Signing out. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.